Under the scorching heat of the American West, a single mother tightly held her 8-year-old son, gasping for air by the roadside. They had just been ruthlessly thrown out by her husband's family, abandoned as if they no longer mattered. No one stopped, no one cared. Death was only a heartbeat away. But then a stranger pulled over and said, "There are those who die in the shade, and then there are those who still live even though they burn under the sun." On a desolate stretch of interstate, with no gas stations, no shelter, no shade, under the blazing summer sun of the American West, Janelle Carter, a black single mother, and her son Malik lay collapsed on the roadside. No one stopped. No one turned back. Only the wind carried the red dust, and a faint cry for help, like a whisper lost in the hot sand. The temperature was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, around 38 degrees Celsius, enough to melt the asphalt beneath the tires. No trees, no awnings, not even a square inch of shade. Just dust, gravel, and the searing heat in every breath, creeping through her thin clothes and burning through her peeling skin. Janelle lay collapsed, her cotton dress torn at the knee, her hair a tangled mess, her sun-damaged skin, and her forehead streaked with dry blood. In her arms, Malik, 8 years old, unconscious, his hands swollen, his lips turning purple, still clutching her dress as if, deep down in his subconscious, he hadn't completely let go of hope. Beside them lay a faded fabric bag, an almost empty water bottle, the only remnants after being kicked out of the Whitmore estate. No ambulance, no phone. No one opened their door or looked back. Only the relentless chirp of crickets and the oppressive heat thickening the air. Janelle whispered in a hoarse voice, "Malik, wake up, baby. Don't scare Mommy, please." No response. From behind the black wrought-iron gates of the Whitmore estate, behind the sun-blocked windows of the ground floor, Beatrice Whitmore, the woman who once called Janelle daughter-in-law, stood motionless, watching. In her hand was a glass of iced tea, the sound of ice clinking against the glass still audible. Her gaze was neither angry nor sympathetic, just a detached, contemptuous indifference, as if observing an animal that had wandered into her garden. Behind her stood Percy Langston, the Whitmore family's financial advisor. He sneered, speaking softly, "A black person stepping foot into this estate is a stain that can never be erased." Outside, the electronic gate slammed shut. Janelle sat holding her son on the sun-scorched lawn. She didn't lift her head, she didn't beg. She only held her son to her chest as if he were the last thing she had left. No one stopped to help. No one opened their door, the color of her skin and the prejudices blinding everyone around them. The dry wind blew through, carrying the scent of burning dust and the incessant buzzing of cicadas, as if even the heavens had given up. Janelle Carter rested her head on her son's chest, feeling Malik's weak breaths slowly begin to ease, to slow down, as if dissolving into the air, and then the sound of an engine hummed faintly, a soft screech of brakes, tires crunching over gravel. No urgency, no noise, but different from all the others. The silver-gray Ford F-150 pulled up by the roadside, right where all the other cars had sped past, as though they were invisible. The sunshade slowly lowered. The man inside rested his hand on the steering wheel. His face was rugged, sun-kissed, eyes squinting against the scorching sunlight. His gaze didn't just glance over and turn away, it stopped. A real gaze. Silas Whitmore, 41 years old, a reclusive millionaire, once the golden name of Western agriculture, until the fire consumed his house, his wife, his daughter. Since then, he had withdrawn to live alone in the midst of hundreds of acres of land, away from the spotlight, away from people, away from questions that felt like daggers. Are you okay? But today, Janelle's gaze was not a question. It was a silent plea, without words and without time. Silas opened the car door and stepped out. He was not in a hurry, nor did he try to appear virtuous. He stopped a few steps away from Janelle, just enough for her to see that he was no threat. His voice was deep, steady, no louder than the wind. "I won't touch anyone. But the boy's about to have a fever. I have water, I have a car, and I have a friend who's a former army medic. Do you need help?" Janelle didn't respond right away. She lifted her face to look at him, her eyes still holding on to the inherent skepticism that a black woman learns throughout her life. Good people are hard to come by. Good white people, even more rare. The harsh words from the Whitmore estate still stung in her. "A colored puppet like you think you can climb into the white family tree? Charles married you for the novelty. What do you have besides that cheap skin?" Even at her husband's funeral, Beatrice had stood there in front of the crowd, a silk handkerchief in her hand, her mouth spitting out words cold as ice. "Janelle, there are doors made of precious wood, but not everyone deserves to walk through them, especially when their feet are still covered in the red dirt from the slums." Janelle had been silent too many times. And now, though there was nothing left to hold on to, she still tightened her grip on her son, hesitating. Silas saw that. He gently set a fresh bottle of water down on the ground, right in front of her feet, then stepped back. "I'll leave it here. If you need more water, I've got it. If you want to go to the hospital, I can take you. If you don't trust me, I'll drive away. But the child needs you awake." A simple gesture. But in Janelle's life, no white person had ever done this. No one had ever given her the power to decide. No one had ever asked her if she needed help. They only told her she should be grateful to be saved. She looked down at Malik. His lips were dry, cracked. She couldn't sit there for another minute. If she did, death wouldn't be far behind. Janelle nodded. Not a nod of trust, but that of a mother with no other choice but to hope in the stranger who finally stopped. Silas nodded back. He didn't say anything more. He opened the car door, lowered the back seat. On the seat was a freshly laundered blanket, a bottle of antiseptic water, and a small first aid kit. He spread out the cloth, poured water, and took a damp towel. No fanfare, no preaching, just action. Quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Janelle held her son tightly all the way. Every time the truck bumped over a pothole, Malik let out a soft groan, and she would lean over to shield his head, as if the slightest tilt would make the world crumble once again. Silas didn't ask anything. He drove silently, his eyes occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror, where the reflection of a weary mother and a child seemed to cling to life only by the purest form of love. When the F-150 turned onto the dirt road leading to the Red Mesa farm, the sun had already set. The last orange-red streaks of daylight stretched across the parched grass fields. In the distance, the farm appeared. A 3-story brick house, a white wooden fence, a faded red-tiled roof peeling with age, and a stable that stood as still as though it had stopped breathing. Silas turned off the engine, stepped out of the truck, and opened the back door without a word. Janelle cradled her son in her arms. Malik was now nearly unconscious. She walked slowly behind Silas, each step sinking deeper into the memories of being shoved out the door, of those scrutinizing glances. Fake. Worthless black trash pretending to be a lady. The door opened. No servants, no crystal chandeliers, just a clean wooden hallway smelling of dried grass and an air without judgment. An hour later, in the simple yet warm living room, Dr. Horace Avery appeared. A black man in his 60s, strong build, eyes full of experience. He had served on the battlefields of Afghanistan, where skin color didn't save anyone from bombs, but the heart could. When he entered the room, he only looked at Janelle for a second, then immediately knelt beside the bed, took out his equipment, and began examining Malik. Silent, focused. Half an hour later, he turned to Silas and spoke softly but loud enough for Janelle to hear. The boy is severely dehydrated, with signs of a prolonged high fever. But he made it through, and I'll be honest, it wasn't a miracle. It was because his mother kept him alive. Janelle stood there, her hand never leaving Malik. She didn't cry, but her arm trembled, as if her body couldn't bear holding the pain inside anymore. Horace stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder. You did well. Many people in that situation would have given up long ago. Janelle nodded quietly, still unable to speak. But in her eyes, for the first time in years, there was something close to gratitude, no longer just defense. In the kitchen, Silas poured hot water slowly. He wasn't used to caring for anyone. He had been awkward with his own daughter when she first caught a cold. He had left his wife up all night alone because he was in meetings with investors from Seattle. But today, he did everything. No one asked. Only one clear reason: someone needed him, and he didn't want to stand by and watch like he had before. Upstairs, in the living room where family photos once hung, there was only one picture frame left on the shelf. Emily, his wife, with smoky gray eyes, and their young daughter, Annie, hugging her teddy bear. The teddy bear now lay on the chair next to Malik's bed. No one placed it there, but somehow it was still there, as if the place that had witnessed loss was learning to heal. Janelle turned her head and saw the photo. She stood still, her gaze fixed on the frame, not with envy, not with fear, but with respect. She's beautiful, Janelle said softly, and the little girl, too. Silas stood near the doorway, holding a glass of water, not stepping inside. They're everything to me. A pause. Then Janelle spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Are you sure they won't see me as an intruder? Silas turned away, looking out the window, where the wind gently blew through the dry grass. I lived in this house for 6 years and no one called my name. No one touched the dinner I made or laughed with me in the kitchen. If they were still here, I believe they wouldn't want me to be alone like this. Janelle didn't answer. She just leaned down, brushing the sweaty curls from Malik's forehead, her hand trembling slightly, but her gaze was calm. A strange calmness that only comes from those who have stood on the edge too many times until they no longer fear falling. Silas stood a little distance away, his gaze never leaving the small figure bent over, shielding the child. In that moment, he didn't see a tired and worn-out black mother. He only saw a mother. No need for definitions, no need for additions, no need to fit into any societal mold. Finally, he spoke, slowly, as if recounting something he had kept hidden for too long. Emily was the only woman who ever had patience for my silence. Annie was just like her, never sitting still, always yelling, "Daddy, I'm a cowboy." She had a stuffed horse named Daisy. I still keep it. Silas's voice faltered. He turned his face slightly, as if to hide from the light that reflected his already weary eyes. That day, the air was dry. I went to a shareholder meeting, left her and the child at home. The old power lines exploded while she was in the kitchen. They called 911 immediately. But he stopped. His breath deepened. His hand tightened around the glass of water, making a small crackling sound. The fire department took 24 minutes to arrive. They said they were stuck in the dispatch schedule. But the truth was, I discovered that the neighborhood we lived in, despite paying taxes, was given lower priority than other areas with more reliable populations. That is, whiter populations. Janelle lifted her head. Her eyes, which had been tense and defensive, softened. Not out of pity, but because, for the first time, she heard a white man acknowledge what black people have had to live with their entire lives. Discrimination doesn't always come from the loudest voices, but from a system that pretends to be fair. You're not trying to justify them, she said softly. No, I just know that if they had come 5 minutes earlier, I wouldn't have had to bury those 2 people in one day. The room fell silent. A gentle breeze blew through the old window, causing the faded curtain to flutter. In the dim light from the oil lamp, Janelle suddenly felt that this space, once the coldest ground for a man who had lost everything, was gradually warming from something that both she and he had been too afraid to believe for too long. Unconditional presence. Janelle turned back to look at Malik. The boy's breathing was more even, his cheeks less flushed. She took the cloth, gently wiping the sweat from his forehead, the gesture so tender it was almost heartbreaking. Silas saw it all, and something within him stirred, a part that had been frozen for 6 years. Not everyone can mother like that, he said softly, as though speaking only to himself. Janelle paused. Then she smiled faintly, a small crack in the armor she had worn her entire adult life in this society. A society that once said a poor black woman would never know how to love the right way. The night passed in silence, only the distant chirping of cicadas, the wind rustling through the dry eucalyptus trees, and the steady breath of a child who had just crossed the fragile line between life and death. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window crack, touching the edge of the old wooden bed, Malik Carter stirred. His eyes opened, slowly and dreamily. Janelle was sitting right beside him, her hand resting on his forehead, her gaze filled with both relief and fatigue. The boy reached out to touch his mother's cheek and whispered, "Mom." Janelle leaned down, kissed his forehead, and smiled. But before her smile could fully form, Malik asked again, his voice young but sharp like a knife. "Mom, why did they chase us away like thieves? Is it because I'm black?" The question wasn't shouted. It didn't hold tears. But to Janelle it was a sound more painful than any slap, any insult, any bruise on the skin. Because for the first time, her 8-year-old son had learned that the color of his skin was a reason for others to hate him. She choked up. Her throat felt frozen, her heart squeezed tight in her chest. The words once hurled at her came back like thunder. "You don't belong in the Whitmore family. My grandson needs a wife with more breeding. You look like you just walked out of a fast food joint. Nothing noble about you, except your acting skills." Janelle had stayed silent, not because she accepted it, but because she thought herself strong enough to bear it alone. But now that cruelty had seeped into her son's eyes, and she knew silence was no longer an option. She tightened her grip on Malik's hand. "It's not because of you, my love. Never because of you." Malik looked at her for a long time, then nodded, but his gaze had changed. It was no longer clear as before. It had a scratch, small, but it would grow over the years unless someone helped him believe the opposite. Meanwhile, Beatrice Whitmore did not stand idle. She didn't need to shout or wave her hands like the extremists on the streets. Beatrice was the kind of person who caused harm with a silver spoon and polite words, cruelty disguised under a cloak of prestige. She didn't just whisper to a few shop owners in town, but personally visited the bakery, the pharmacy, even the church, always starting with the same tone. "I'm not judging. But if anyone has ever ruined my grandson's marriage and is living off white men, I think this town should be careful." A few days later, Janelle went to the bakery to buy milk for Malik. The saleswoman, an older woman who used to call her dear, when she walked beside Charles, now didn't even look at her. "We're not serving today," she mumbled, taking money from another customer. Janelle silently turned away. On the fence in front of the old church, someone had posted a white sign in bold letters, "Protect the community from exploitative women." No one named anyone directly, but everyone knew who they were talking about. On the town's social media, comments appeared. "She used to sleep on the floor of the estate. Now she's at someone else's farm." "The old tricks are still alive and well, huh?" "A bastard child and a sneaky mother. No place in Red Mesa." Silas knew, he saw it all, but he didn't tell Janelle. He only did one thing. Every morning, he would place a fresh loaf of bread on the kitchen table, pour coffee, and wipe clean each window frame, as if to say, "This house is yours, no matter what they say outside." Janelle saw all of it. She didn't say thank you, not because she was ungrateful, but because she was too used to people doing favors with a price to pay. But from her eyes, from the way her hand gently gripped the teacup Silas handed her, he understood. Elsewhere, Percy Langston sat in his office, holding a glass of wine, his hand gliding over the old financial papers Silas had signed. He chuckled softly. "If Whittemore really plans to stick with that black woman, I'm afraid we'll have to find a way to reclaim the land before things get more complicated." The dark corner of power was not in the courts, but in the deals made before anyone realized they had lost everything. In another corner of America, where skyscraper lights blur the horizon and rumors travel faster than the wind, Finn Morgan, an investigative reporter from Chicago, stumbled upon a comment in the Community Watch Silver Bluff group. "Black women seduce old, weak white men to get their money. It's still a common thing. The case at the Whitmore farm is a living example." Finn stopped. He wasn't easily swayed by social media, but there was something about the way that statement sounded, both familiar and disgusting, that made him open the Silver Bluff town files. 3 days later, he left the newsroom with a backpack, an old leather notebook, and a camera always fully charged. Finn had investigated civil suits involving racial discrimination, written explosive articles about police abuse of power, and uncovered corruption in asset litigation processes. He knew one thing for sure. Where there's an odd silence amidst a scandal, there's always someone being silenced. When Finn arrived at the Red Mesa farm, dusk had settled. Silas opened the gate, his eyes cautious, but when he heard the reason for the visit and saw the press badge, he silently gestured toward the red brick house, where the kitchen light cast a warm glow against the sunset. Janelle greeted Finn on the porch, offering a glass of lemonade with no ice and an old wooden chair with worn edges. She wasn't wearing makeup, didn't dress up, but in that initial moment of silence, Finn understood. This was not a woman looking for someone to tell her story. She just needed someone who dared to listen. After more than an hour of conversation, Finn didn't rush, didn't interrupt, only wrote notes by hand, as if every word Janelle spoke was a thread stitching together the truth that had been torn apart. "I'm not here to write a piece about black women and anger. I'm here to find out who created that anger and called it natural," Finn said quietly. Janelle looked at him for a long time, then nodded. 3 days later, Finn got a copy of Charles Whitmore's accident report. The initial details were full of contradictions. He hired a forensic expert to reconstruct the scene, and what he discovered made his blood run cold. Charles's car was traveling at nearly 120 miles per hour, with no sign of braking. The Bluetooth in the car had been removed before the police arrived. The blood alcohol report was replaced with a lighter version. The last call before the crash wasn't to Janelle, but to a woman named Crystal Mooney, later identified as Charles's white mistress. Finn tracked down Crystal, now living in Dallas, and through a leaked recording from a backup software on an old mobile device, he heard Charles shouting, "I'm leaving Janelle soon, okay? But if you call while I'm driving again, I swear I'll—" The sound of a horn honking, the screech of brakes, then silence. Meanwhile, Finn also secretly contacted a local mechanic named Randy, who had worked on Charles's car. Randy clearly remembered someone picking up the car just hours after the accident, saying they were family, that someone was Percy Langston. Percy paid in cash, asked for a full electrical system check, and brought the original Bluetooth device. When Finn asked why Percy did this, Randy just shook his head. "I'm white, but I know what justice is. When I saw Janelle being vilified, I knew. Someone was whitewashing a very dirty truth." Beatrice knew Finn was in town. She invited a lawyer, while also whispering to the church pastor and a few women's group leaders. A freelance reporter? Well, she's probably the sympathy story type, calling for donations. Janelle's good at that. She knows how to ride the wave at just the right moment. Percy didn't just talk. He hired a private investigator to follow Finn, tried to hack into his computer, and even made an anonymous, threatening phone call. Some stories don't need to be dug too deep, my friend. Some deaths should be left alone. Finn recorded everything, in his own way. One rainy evening, in the small cafe at the end of town, Finn turned on his recorder, looking at Janelle and Silas. His voice was calm. "If you agree, I'll publish the whole truth, not just to protect you, but to stop people like Percy and Beatrice from using their power to erase their own mistakes." Janelle froze. Then she nodded, not for revenge, but because for the first time, her voice would no longer be silenced. The rain began to fall at dusk. Not heavy, but enough to wash away the red dust from the roof of the Red Mesa farm. In the kitchen, the yellow light spilled onto the scratched oak table. On the table were 2 cups of hot tea and a long silence between the two people. A man who had buried his emotions for 6 years and a woman who had been forced to stay silent her entire life. Silas sat across from her, his hand lightly resting on the table, his eyes fixed on Janelle with the patience of someone not seeking answers, but giving the other person the power to speak the truth. "Do you want to tell me about that day?" Janelle looked down at her hands, her slender fingers, worn with calluses along her thumb, the silent legacy of years spent hand-washing clothes, cooking, and holding on to a family that had never truly been hers. She took a deep breath. Then she began. "That morning, Beatrice called me to the estate. Percy was there, too. They sat in the main hall like 2 people running their own private trial." Beatrice placed a stack of papers in front of Janelle. Among them was a document giving up custody of Malik. She said, if I signed, I would get a post-marriage support check, a blunt way of saying hush money. Janelle spoke, her eyes steady, not avoiding the truth. I asked, "What if I don't sign?" Beatrice just laughed, very lightly, as if she had expected that response. Percy stood up, nodding toward the 2 men guarding the door. Before I could react, they grabbed my arm. Malik screamed. One of them shoved him down the steps. His arm hit the edge of the stone, blood flowed, and they laughed. Janelle paused. Her eyes were no longer wet. The pain in her had long since moved past tears. I picked Malik up. He cried silently. I just remember screaming, "Don't touch my son!" Then running out the gate. No shoes, no purse, no phone. I walked over a mile in the burning sun. Silas clenched his fist. Inside him was a part of memory he hadn't invited, the image of firefighters holding him back while his house burned, the doctor shaking his head in the ICU. He knew that feeling of helplessness. But Janelle, she had carried it alone, with no one standing beside her. Janelle continued, I knocked on 3 houses nearby. One slammed the door. One yelled, "Please get out of this neighborhood." The last one called the police to remove the black homeless person causing trouble. Her voice shook, but each word held firm. I knew I wasn't white. I wasn't born into a class that could walk into the Whitmore estate without being looked down upon. But I am his mother. No matter how they think I don't deserve Charles, I'm the one who gave birth to my son. Silas looked straight into her eyes, his voice soft. You don't need anyone to acknowledge that, as long as you still believe it. Janelle smiled, a smile that wasn't light, wasn't safe, but one made from courage, from battles she never chose, but still had to fight. I used to think if I stayed quiet, if I was kind, if I behaved, they'd leave my son out of it. But no. To them we are something that must be cut out, because we stain the white bloodline of their prestigious family. On the other side of town, Beatrice was meeting with Percy in the living room of the estate. She poured wine, her hands adorned with silk gloves, her voice steady. She's starting to talk. And now there's even a reporter trailing her. Percy, take care of your part. I won't let a black woman destroy this family's legacy. Percy smirked, his voice low and gruff. I'll make sure she has no place left to speak. But this time, Janelle was no longer alone. And ahead, the truth was starting to speak. The news that Beatrice Whitmore had filed for legal custody of Malik Carter came as a surprise, but not entirely shocking to Janelle. She knew people like Beatrice would never let go of anything they deemed belonging to white bloodlines, even if they had cast it aside themselves. In the lawsuit, Beatrice's lawyer stated, Our client, Mrs. Beatrice Whitmore, the legal adoptive mother and remaining representative of the Whitmore family, requests custody of her grandson, as the child is currently living in unstable conditions, lacking legal education, with an unemployed mother, no property, and cohabiting illegally with a man of a different race and no marriage ties. Every word reeked of sophisticated rhetoric. No one explicitly said, a black person isn't worthy, but the entire narrative was a roundabout way of saying it. On the day of the trial, the Shady Valley courtroom was packed. At the front sat Beatrice in a gray suit, her hair styled high, sunglasses dangling from her collar like a reminder, I belong to a different class. Next to her was Percy Langston, leaning on a silver cane, his eyes cold as ice. On the other side was Janelle, wearing a simple but neat dark purple dress. Beside her, Silas Whitmore in a modest suit, silent, not drawing attention. But his eyes followed every breath of Janelle's, like a quiet fortress. The plaintiff's lawyer stood, starting with a lengthy speech, but the underlying message was clear. The child is growing up without moral foundation, without an appropriate academic environment, and in a family where traditional values have been replaced by disorganized emotions. When it was Janelle's turn, she stood up, no lawyer, no representative, just her, alone. Her voice was calm, not shouting, not angry, but each word was as hard as chiseled stone. I don't have a marriage contract. I don't have a mansion, but I have something they don't. I've never abandoned my son, not even when I was thrown out into the scorching 104-degree heat, when I had to carry him across the desert, when his blood dripped onto my hands. The courtroom fell silent. No more pen tapping, no more murmuring. Janelle continued, her eyes fixed on the judge. I once thought, if I lived decently, my son would be spared. But no, there are people who will never forgive a child just because it carries half black blood, especially when that blood belongs to a family accustomed to sitting above the law. Beatrice subtly clenched the edge of her coat. Percy furrowed his brow, but Janelle didn't stop. If being a mother means not running away, then I've done it. If being a mother means carrying the weight of people's words, then I've carried it. And if being a mother means standing here, in a room where the color of skin is an unspoken crime, then I stand here, not begging, just not letting my child be robbed again. Finn Morgan, sitting in the back row, took notes. Beside him sat a representative from a major press agency, there to witness a trial, civil but with an unusually moral tone. After Janelle's statement, the plaintiff's lawyer turned to cross-examine. "You're living with a white man without legal ties. Do you think that's a good model for a child?" Janelle smiled faintly, not out of sarcasm, but because the question was out of touch with the time they didn't understand. "I think the best thing for my child is to be loved, to be protected, and not to be taught that the color of his skin is something to be ashamed of." In the spectator seats, Malik sat next to Dr. Horace Avery, the man who had saved him, still holding on to the sketchbook tightly. The boy didn't understand everything about the trial, but his eyes never left his mother for a second. After Janelle sat down, Malik turned to Horace. "My mom is the strongest, right?" Horace didn't answer with words. He only nodded, very slightly, because he knew. In that courtroom, there was only one person truly fighting to protect their family with all her heart. Not the lawyer, not the property, but the bond of motherhood. When Janelle sat down, the courtroom seemed to sink into a silence as tense as a taut string. No one spoke, no one tapped their pen. Only the soft rustling of papers and the intense, piercing gaze of the elderly judge, who had sat on this bench for 30 years and had never seen a black woman stand, speak, and not apologize. Then Finn Morgan stood up. He wasn't wearing a blazer, just a rolled-up white shirt, his hair slightly messy from staying up late, holding a thick file carefully numbered, each page marked with ink. His voice was clear. "Your Honor, I request permission to present some new evidence related to this case. Not to rebut, but to expose the true nature of those seeking custody as a tool of revenge, rather than out of love." The judge nodded. Beatrice furrowed her brow. Percy started tapping his silver cane lightly on the floor. Finn turned on the recorder. A familiar voice came through, dry but commanding. "After that woman loses custody, we'll take back Red Mesa. I don't care if Silas is living with her. The land belongs to the Whitmore family. It goes back to where it belongs." "Beatrice?" Her voice. No longer the polite pretension, but the raw truth when she thought no one was listening. Beatrice's face drained of color. Her eyes flicked toward Percy as if asking, "Why does that recording still exist?" Finn didn't stop. "Next, I present a copy of the deed for the 40 acres of land from the Red Mesa farm, signed under Silas Whittemore's name, but with a signature that doesn't match. The actual signer was Percy Langston, using Charles Whitmore's power of attorney, which he had forged before Charles's death." Finn pulled out a stack of notarized documents from a former investment lawyer, along with a legal appraisal from the Arizona State Asset Control Office. These lands weren't just illegally seized. They were also mortgaged for a joint venture loan that Percy is currently under investigation for by the U.S. Department of Justice. A collective gasp rose from the back of the courtroom. Beatrice closed her eyes. Percy stopped tapping his cane. His hand shook slightly. The cold air from the air conditioner suddenly became more noticeable. The judge nodded at the court clerk. And in that moment the door on the left side of the courtroom swung open. 2 federal officers entered, carrying an emergency arrest warrant for Percy Langston on charges of forgery of legal documents, federal financial fraud, unauthorized manipulation of assets. Percy mumbled, "I was just following Charles's orders. I didn't mean..." but the cold handcuffs had already clasped around his wrists before he could say anything else. Meanwhile, Beatrice remained seated, but the air of authority was gone from her face. Only a faint layer of lipstick couldn't conceal the paleness of her skin. The judge turned to her. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" Beatrice looked around, seeing that all eyes had shifted away from her. The name Whitmore was no longer a crown. It was now a shackle. She stood up, trying to keep her voice steady. I just want what's best for the child." Janelle laughed. Not loudly, but at the right moment, and with the right meaning. "What's best for my son by taking his mother away?" As things seemed to settle, Silas stood up. He didn't hold any papers, didn't need notes. He just walked to the center of the courtroom, looked directly at the judge, then bowed his head slightly, as if he were an old farmer invited to an important meeting, not because he wanted to argue, but because the truth didn't need to be embellished. "I am Silas Whitmore, owner of the Red Mesa Farm. The current estimated value of the property is over $30 million. A murmur rippled through the room. But Silas raised his hand, then continued, "But I'm not here for the land, not for the money. I'm here for a boy who once called me Dad, on a day when his mother had nothing left but pain." He looked toward Malik, who was sitting next to Janelle, his eyes bright. "I don't need paperwork to be a father, but if I have to, today I'll sign anything to prove that. I will never abandon this boy. Not because of his skin, not because of public opinion, but because of my heart." The courtroom was silent. No more applause, not needed, because the truth had pierced deep into the lies, and everyone knew, even Beatrice. The sound of the gavel echoed through the old wooden courtroom of Shady Valley County, like the final tolling of a bell, closing everything that was false, cruel, and unjust that had once overshadowed Janelle Carter's life. The court rules: Janelle Carter shall have full legal custody of her son, Malik Carter. Silas Whitmore is recognized as the legal stepfather. There was no cheering, no applause, only a thick silence that seemed to breathe, a silence not from shock, but from respect. Janelle stood, her legs trembling as if she could no longer feel the ground. Not out of fear, but because in that moment all her strength had poured into maintaining her honor, the truth, and motherhood. She almost collapsed, but a steady arm wrapped around her. Silas. No words. He simply held her, like a shelter protecting her from the storm she had just emerged from. Malik didn't wait for anyone to remind him. He jumped from the row of seats, leaving his coloring book behind, abandoning the "hostage to mom" sign he'd hidden in his pocket. He rushed into his mother's arms, then wrapped his arms around Silas. His face lit up, his eyes shining. "Now I have a dad, right? Dad will never leave Mom, will he?" Silas knelt down, still holding Janelle's back. He placed his hand on Malik's shoulder, his gaze softening in a strangely peaceful way. "Never, son." No one laughed, no one cried, but the entire room seemed to breathe easier after a long storm. The elderly judge cleared his throat, but didn't continue speaking. Perhaps he knew that any words spoken now would feel insignificant compared to the greatness of that moment. On the other side, Beatrice Whitmore sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the silver cane Percy had left behind, like a relic of a failed game. Her lipstick faded. The proud posture she usually carried now slumped, as if the air around her had shifted. "It's impossible," she whispered. But the court didn't need her to believe. For the first time, the truth didn't need her permission to be acknowledged. Percy Langston was no longer in the room. He had been taken away 10 minutes earlier, but the echo of his handcuffed footsteps still seemed to pound into every corner of the wooden courtroom. The forged contracts, the financial schemes, the malicious whispers, all now stood as unlawful evidence, no longer tools of power. As people began to leave their seats, an older woman, Mrs. Mildred, the sheriff's wife, walked over to Janelle, placing a hand on her shoulder and squeezing it gently. "I've never seen anyone fight as beautifully as you, Janelle. Not with money or fame, but with a heart that doesn't know how to surrender." Janelle took her hand. She didn't say anything, but her eyes, for the first time in many years, were no longer guarded. There was only the relief of someone who had finally lived as their true self. In the far corner, Finn Morgan closed his notebook. He didn't need to take any more notes. He knew the article he would write wouldn't be about a trial, but a declaration of life. A black mother doesn't need anyone to define who she is to be a mother. Stepping out of the courthouse, the wind blew softly, carrying the chill of early March. On the steps, Silas held Malik's hand, with his other hand gently supporting Janelle's back. The three of them, no shared blood, but walking together as a true family. Behind them, a decaying billboard with the words Whitmore Legacy Foundation swayed in the wind. An old symbol, no longer cared for, no longer kept straight. One late spring afternoon, a gentle breeze blew across the hills to the west of Red Mesa. Fresh green grass sprouted among the dry, weathered rocks. The sky was as clear as a lake, with only a few white clouds drifting like the breath of memories. Silas walked slowly along the narrow trail leading up the hill, his hand tightly holding Janelle's. Malik ran ahead, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he had just picked from the valley below. Each step was a convergence of what had been lost and what was beginning to sprout anew. At the top of the hill was a small family cemetery of the Whittemore lineage, where only a few simple white stone markers stood. No angel statues, no marble arches. Just two graves lying side by side, quietly. Emily Whittemore, beloved wife. Annie Whittemore, the girl with a smile bright enough for the whole world. Silas stopped. He placed his hand on the cool stone. His eyes weren't wet, but they were so deep that it seemed as though they were speaking a language without words. He pulled a small velvet box from his chest pocket. He opened it. Inside was a slender platinum ring. No stones, no intricate carvings. On the inside, only 3 letters were engraved. J. S. M. "I kept the old ring for the past," Silas spoke softly, his voice low like the wind passing through the pine trees. "But this is the new one. Not to replace, but to rebuild. Not to forget Emily or Annie, but to turn their losses into the foundation for a new home. A home that once burned to the ground." Janelle didn't say anything. She stood there for a long time, her gaze not on Silas, but on the faded photograph on Emily's gravestone, the woman with smoky gray eyes and a gentle smile. Then she stepped forward. She knelt at Emily's grave. She didn't pray. She didn't beg. She simply placed her hand on the green grass, as if resting it on the shoulder of another woman who had once loved this man, and whispered, "I didn't come to erase his memories. I came to help preserve them, just as they were and as they deserved to be." Malik stood behind her, holding the bouquet of flowers. He quietly placed it before Annie's grave. He bowed his head, his voice small. "Annie, I don't know what you were like, but I promise I'll make Dad Silas smile every day, like you used to." Silas stood still. No one saw him wipe his tears, but no one needed to. The way he gently squeezed Janelle's hand, then bowed his head toward those 2 graves, that was enough. Janelle turned back and faced Silas. He didn't kneel. There were no classic marriage proposals. He simply opened his palm, placing the ring in her hand, as if offering a chance he once thought he had lost forever. She looked at the ring for a long time, then she nodded. Not because she was moved, not because she was loved, but because she was respected. For the first time in her life, a man didn't love her as one might love a tragic story. He loved her as a real woman, with a voice, with scars, with a past, and worthy of a future. From the top of the hill, the three of them descended. No one carried flowers. No one carried tears. They only carried one thing that had been buried long ago: hope. A month after that still afternoon on the old graveyard hill, the name Red Mesa Ranch was replaced with a new wooden sign, hand-painted, Sunrise Ranch. The ranch of new beginnings. There was no ceremony for the name change, no banners, no ribbon cutting. But that morning, the vast quiet land seemed to be infused with a fresh breeze, not the clamor of rebirth, but a quiet commitment. From now on, this place will no longer be a monument to pain. An old horse barn was renovated. The wooden planks were polished, and the floor was relaid with recycled bricks. The outside still bore traces of faded paint, but inside, it was a different world. Janelle Carter, who had once been thrown out of the estate as if she were less than human, now stood in the middle of that space, like a true teacher. On the blackboard in the center of the room, the first line she wrote with white chalk was clear and neat. Today, we learn letters, but most importantly, how to stand back up after being pushed down. Below, nearly 20 children sat neatly on wooden benches. They wore no uniforms. Some had on flip-flops, others were barefoot. Most were children of color, the children of workers, immigrants, or those who had never had any official educational records. A curly-haired girl with pigtails whispered, "Ms. Janelle is as pretty as a fairy, but not like the ones at my old school, always asking, 'Did your parents pay the tuition?'" Janelle walked around the room, holding each child's hand, guiding them to form their letters. Her gaze was gentle but not indulgent, because she knew the children here didn't need pity, they needed opportunity. She had once been a child like them, left behind. No one asked, "Do you understand the lesson?" Only the insinuating looks. "Where are you from? How do you say your name? Did your mom ever go to prison?" In a corner of the classroom, Malik Carter, now 10 years old, was diligently writing a story with a pencil. The title he gave it was "The Man Who Planted Grass But Grew a Family." That was how Malik referred to Silas Whitmore, the man he once thought would leave like everyone else. But in the end, he stayed, quietly tending the soil, picking up rocks, and building a real home. Sunrise Ranch was no longer just a place for 3 people. Now, every morning, the sound of children's laughter echoed from the classroom, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the kitchen on the breeze. Children ran past the white fence, chasing each other between rows of newly planted carrots. Ruby May, the little girl who used to be the neighbor helping with the gardening, now took care of the vegetable garden, teaching the children how to sow seeds by hand. Beatrice Whitmore, now retired from the town council, lived quietly in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. One day, while reading the local newspaper, she came across a small article. Sunrise Ranch opens free community classes for children who are out of school. Founded by Janelle Carter, a woman who survived the wounds of prejudice. She folded the newspaper. Her eyes showed no anger, no regret. Only the emptiness of someone who had lost both the victory and the moral standing to argue. In the old classroom, which had once been a horse barn, Janelle placed a photo frame on the bookshelf. A small, slightly faded photo of Silas holding little Annie from years ago, with Emily smiling brightly beside them. Under the photo, Janelle wrote a line with white chalk, hanging it at the corner of the board. "Your story doesn't end where others stopped believing in you." That afternoon, the sun set earlier than usual. The sunlight filtered through the gray clouds, the breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and a hint of lavender from the windowsill of the classroom at Sunrise Ranch. Janelle was sitting, teaching Malik how to revise the ending of his first short story. He had written about a man who thought he was only good at growing grass, but later learned how to care for a broken heart. Suddenly, from afar, the sound of shoes hitting the dry ground gently echoed, an unusual rhythm amidst the familiar pace of life on the ranch. Janelle looked up. The woman was standing there. Beatrice Whitmore. No driver, no Prada sunglasses, no Hermes bag, no haughty gaze that had once made so many people bow their heads. Just an older woman, walking through a white fence, with unkempt gray hair and eyes red from lack of sleep. Janelle didn't stand up. She remained seated, her hand resting on her son's paper, as if reminding herself she was no longer in that old courtroom, but in her own home. Beatrice stopped a few meters away. She didn't step forward. Perhaps for the first time she realized that this was land she no longer had the right to walk on as an owner. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from an ego worn down to the breaking point. I didn't come here to take anything back. I just want to speak the truth once." Janelle didn't respond. Malik looked up, about to ask, "Who's that, Mom?" But Janelle gently placed her hand over his. Malik understood and lowered his head, resuming his coloring of the word hope in green pencil. Beatrice took a deep breath. "I envy you. Not because you're Malik's mother, but because Charles once looked at you with eyes that I never received. Even when he no longer loved me, I thought, I could reclaim the legacy by erasing you from everyone's memory." Her voice choked. But that was wrong. A silence fell over the entire space. The wind blew through the doorframe. The old horse barn door, now a classroom, creaked softly as if reminding them of memories no one wanted to repeat. Janelle didn't say, "I forgive you," not because she lacked compassion, but because forgiveness was not something that needed to be spoken, especially to someone who had once stripped her of her voice. She only nodded gently, not to make peace, but to let go, for herself. Beatrice lowered her head and turned away. There was no invitation into the house, no hot tea, no farewell hugs, but perhaps she had received more than she could have imagined, a silence without hatred. A few weeks later, Percy Langston was sentenced to 5 years in prison for forgery of financial documents, fraudulent trust asset manipulation, slander of an innocent person's identity. There was no one to see him off, no one waiting outside the courthouse, only a prisoner transport vehicle arriving on time and 2 federal officers, unknown, impassive. When he was handcuffed and led away, Percy glanced back. No one looked, no last-minute glances, not even from those who once sat with him at the banquet, who had called him the financial strategist of the Southwest. The reputation he built by stepping on others, in the end, only led to silence, full of contempt. That evening, at Sunrise Ranch, Janelle sat on the porch. In her lap was the first print of Malik's short story, "The Man Who Planted Grass But Grew a Family." Silas came out holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. They didn't speak about Beatrice. They didn't mention Percy, because those names no longer rested on their shoulders. Only the wind blew, only Malik's voice in the room, reading his story aloud to his little sister, Grace, who listened. Late at night, when the last light in the community building at Sunrise Ranch had gone out, only the sound of crickets in the grass and the faint glow from a small room upstairs remained. At the oil-stained plywood table, Malik Carter Whittemore, now a 28-year-old young teacher, sat writing a letter by hand, not to send, not to seal, just to place next to the photo frame of the woman who had taught him to see the world not through the filter of hate, but through unconditional love. May 12th, my 28th birthday. Mom, today. I taught the last period in a teen literature class at the suburban high school on the east side. After the class, a brown-skinned student asked me, "Mr. Malik, have you ever had people not believe in you just because you're black?" I looked at that boy and thought, I used to be that boy. Do you know, Mom? When I was 8 years old, they called you a blatant thief. Not because you stole anything, but because you were a black woman brave enough to love a white man, and brave enough to keep your son with nothing but blood and tears. They called you the stain of the town, a threat to the Whitmore family legacy, but I never saw that. I saw you staying up all night, wiping my forehead when I had a 103-degree fever in a small room with no air conditioning. I saw you split your meals in half so I could eat. I saw you sitting down to teach me to spell with an old, tattered book that someone else had thrown away. And most importantly, I saw you, a black woman with no money, no lawyer, no noble bloodline, walk into that courtroom, stand in front of those who had trampled on you and say, "I am a mother, and I won't run away." I grew up not in a mansion, but in a home with a dining table that always had an extra chair for anyone rejected outside. I grew up in true love. No one had to buy it, no one defined it. Today, as I stand in front of the class, just as you did at Sunrise Ranch, I understand one thing. You didn't just save me from being robbed of my future. You saved the world I'm living in, by not teaching me to hate, but by teaching me to believe that true love never bows down to prejudice. Mom, I've never said this, because black men are taught to be strong, to be silent, to be resilient. But today, I don't want to be strong anymore. I just want to be weak for once to say, "Thank you, Mom, for not leaving, for not becoming what the world tried to make you, for choosing to be a mother, even when no one accepted that. Your son, the one who used to be left on the side of the road, now stands in the classroom, teaching the forgotten children that you don't need anyone's permission to exist." Malik Carter Whittemore, who still carries your last name, and is proud of it. The letter was carefully placed in a small wooden frame next to the picture of Janelle smiling in the sunlight. Beneath it was an engraved line, "My mother didn't change the world. She just changed one child, and that child decided not to stop." That afternoon at Sunrise Ranch, the sunlight spread evenly like honey flowing over the white wooden fence. On the porch, Janelle Whitmore sat knitting a scarf for little Grace, her hands soft and slow, each stitch as if reconnecting fragments of memories lost along the way. Silas walked out from the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of ginger tea. He didn't say anything, just gently placed the cup next to Janelle, then sat beside her, leaning back against the chair, his eyes gazing into the distance, where the children were playing under the shade of a tree, their laughter ringing out like glass chimes. Malik, now a fully grown man, sat on the grass, reading a fairy tale aloud to his little sister Grace, while drawing whimsical shapes with colored chalk. She giggled, then jumped into his lap, snatching the notebook from him. Janelle watched the two of them without speaking, but in her eyes there was something that couldn't be hidden. Peace. A kind of peace she once thought she would never have. No one mentioned the trial. No one spoke of Beatrice or Percy Langston. Those names, once dominating her life, once scars that could never heal, but now they were just stones beneath her feet, too weak to hold back the one who had learned how to stand on her own. From the classroom across the yard, the sound of a drum echoed. A group of students, ranging from 8 to 13 years old, rushed out onto the field like a flock of birds let out of their coop. In their hands, they held folded pieces of paper, their first life stories which they called The Lines of the Forgotten Ones. Today marked the 10th anniversary of Sunrise Ranch. But Janelle refused to speak. She said to Malik, "I don't need to stand on a stage. I just need to sit here and listen to the kids tell their stories of what they've overcome." Ruby May, now a third-year herbalism student at Texas State, began with a heartfelt reading. "I once thought I was just a shadow, until Miss Janelle handed me a book and taught me how to say my name without trembling." Next was Emmanuel, a brown-skinned boy who had been expelled from public school for slow learning, standing up, stuttering but filled with pride. "I'm not trash. I'm a seed, and now I'm growing because of her." There was no champagne, no violins, no fresh flowers wrapped in satin, just homemade cornbread, freshly squeezed lemonade, and scattered applause, sincere but imperfect, like tiny crutches lifting the hearts that had been broken. Malik, the boy who had once lain motionless on the roadside, now stood in front of the microphone attached to a wooden pole, reading the final part of his story. The man only intended to plant grass, but then he sowed an entire spring. The mother wasn't anyone special, but she stayed, and from then on, we knew, the light doesn't fall on the perfect. It finds those who don't give up, even after being swallowed by darkness. As the day turned to evening, the shadows of the trees stretched long across the brown dirt field. The children ran past the white fence, chasing each other between newly planted carrot rows. In the classroom, little Grace bit her lip as she wrote her first sentence in the white notebook. "My family is the people who didn't leave." Janelle looked at her daughter, then turned to Silas, the man who had once lost everything, but had never stopped choosing to stay. He took her hand, not squeezing, just touching enough to know, this hand he would never let go of again. This family didn't come from bloodlines. It wasn't framed in a birth certificate. There were no prestigious genealogies, just a choice, to choose love when it would be easiest to walk away, to choose to hold on when everything said to let go, to choose to walk together when life's road was once burning sand and sharp stones. Sunrise Ranch wouldn't make national headlines, but here, every day, there are children learning to read, learning to write, and most importantly, learning how not to be ashamed of themselves. Janelle Carter, once thrown out of the estate gates like a societal stain, now sits in the land she, along with kind people, has helped preserve. No titles, no apologies, just to see the light, reaching those who were once forgotten by the world. Because true light doesn't choose the luxurious places to stop. It chooses where it's needed most, where trust has been extinguished. Janelle Carter's story isn't just the journey of a black mother who was abandoned. It's the journey of anyone who has ever been overlooked. Anyone who has silently stood on the sidelines of life simply because they were different. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't seek to please society. She only chose one thing, to stay and to love, as if she had never been hurt. And what about you? Were you ever the one forgotten? Or were you the one silently extending a hand to help someone else stand again in life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because maybe your story will be the light for someone else. If you think this story deserves to be shared, don't forget to like, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to not miss the next touching journeys. Because light, when shared, will never fade,